Hey guys, tonight we drift into the deep, warm waters of the Aegean, where the stars blur into the sea and the waves carry secrets older than memory. Imagine salt slick marble skin, foam clinging to your toes, and the hush of dawn barely breaking over a horizon that's about to birth the most dangerously beautiful creature mythology ever dared to imagine. Aphrodite doesn't arrive quietly. She doesn't have a baby phase or an awkward tween stage. She rises already full-grown, already divine, already naked, and already the reason everyone nearby forgets how to speak. Born from the sea after Kronos castrates his father Uranus. Yes, with a sickle. Yes, it's messy. She emerges from the resulting foam like a beauty had gone rogue, riding a scallop shell like it's her personal Uber, and you can practically hear the soundtrack swell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're feeling bold, post your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where and when in the world you're listening. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're drifting now, floating beside her shell as it glides toward the island of Cythera, or maybe Cyprus. The sources are fuzzy, and historians still argue whether her first landing spot matters. But the gist remains wherever she lands. Things immediately get weird. The flowers bloom too quickly. Birds forget to migrate. Gods feel funny in their stomachs. She steps onto land, and time itself seems to stutter. The Greek gods are not subtle creatures. Zeus hears about this seafoam newcomer and instantly goes full HR panic mode. Here's a divine entity who can basically seduce anything with a pulse, and he knows exactly what happens when a powerful being enters the dating pool of Olympus. Spoiler chaos. So, naturally, Zeus decides to lock this time bomb down. In a move that makes every teenage arranged marriage look romantic by comparison, he marries her off to Hephaestus, the god of blacksmithing, craftsmanship, and, unfortunately, back problems. He's brilliant, but hobbling, soot-faced, socially awkward, and often smells like molten bronze. Not exactly Aphrodite's type, and that's where the problems begin. Aphrodite may be technically monogamous on paper, but in practice, she's an open relationship wrapped in silk robes and lingering eye contact. Her marriage to Hephaestus is less a love story and more a slow-burn sitcom where she cheats constantly, and he builds increasingly passive-aggressive machines, like, say, an invisible golden net to catch her in bed with Ares. But we'll get there. First, you need to understand that Aphrodite isn't just a goddess of beauty. She's beauty made volatile. She doesn't have power. She is power. Her presence causes infatuation, obsession, and the kind of dumb decisions normally reserved for blackout nights in Vegas. And ancient societies didn't treat that lightly. Across city-states, she gets her own temples, rituals, and entire job classes dedicated to sacred sex. More on those later. But right now, she's still new to the pantheon, sashaying through Olympus with the casual confidence of someone who's never had a bad angle. The other goddesses hate her almost instantly. Hera's already territorial. Athena's got her wise virgin brand to protect. And Artemis, well, Artemis hasn't smiled since the Bronze Age. They all see Aphrodite not just as competition, but as a threat to the carefully balanced, extremely dysfunctional status quo. And Aphrodite, she's unbothered. She lounges, she flirts, she makes things happen. Love affairs, awkward crushes, full-on declarations of war. You know, casual Tuesday stuff. The gods think she's frivolous, Mortal men think she's a dream. But the truth is, Aphrodite is one of the few deities who deals in the invisible mechanics that actually move history desire. Jealousy, longing. She doesn't lift swords or throw lightning bolts. She whispers the kind of suggestions that make generals start wars over glances and kings abandon empires for a woman's laugh. Which brings us to tonight's first sex story. Buckle up gently. Ancient texts like Sex with Kings love to remind us that beauty often comes with strings. Take the case of Sardanapalus, the last Assyrian king, who was known for wearing makeup, seducing both men and women, and building a pleasure palace where guests weren't allowed to say no. Some historians speculate that Aphrodite's cultic rituals, particularly in regions near Mesopotamia, may have inspired or overlapped with these royal indulgences. The queen or high priestess of her temple could symbolically marry a new ruler through ritual sex. In other words, sleeping with the divine wasn't just about pleasure, it was a political act, often bound to land, power, and legitimacy. Sex, in this era, is rarely just sex. Quirky side note. The Greeks didn't agree on what she looked like. Some painted her pale and soft, others golden and tanned. The Spartans, weirdly, gave her armor. Yes, Sparta had a version of Aphrodite with a helmet and shield, because even their love goddess had to be combat ready. You can almost imagine her ducking out of a lover's bed to casually win a javelin contest. Historians still argue whether this Spartan Aphrodite represented feminine duality or just Spartan overcompensation. Back on Olympus, things continue to spiral. Gods who once ignored each other now send flowers. Hera finds lipstick in her husband's chariot. Hermes writes poetry. Even Poseidon starts making waves literally when Aphrodite turns up on the beach in a sheer tunic. She's not trying to cause problems, but she does. In the same way a hurricane isn't trying to knock over your deck chair, it just exists, and things fall apart around it. And yet, there's something melancholy under her glamour. Because while Aphrodite is the object of everyone's desire, she's rarely the subject of her own story. She's summoned, gifted, bribed with, and blamed. Beauty, even divine beauty, becomes a prison. And the more wars she accidentally triggers, the more she becomes a scapegoat for chaos the gods were already primed to unleash. She's not the storm. She's the breeze before it. As you settle deeper into the mythic hum, remember this. The Greeks weren't trying to flatter Aphrodite. They feared her. She wasn't a pinup. She was a warning. Love, to them, was wild, destructive, and fundamentally uncontrollable. You could pray to Aphrodite, but you could never own her. You could worship her temple, but she'd still set your life on fire if it amused her. She was the divine embodiment of every time you said, "I can handle this," and then absolutely could not. And that's only her origin story. You're still floating, still weightless in this mythic sea of schemes and seduction. But now the ripples begin to sharpen. Picture a wedding in Olympus, everything gleaming, gods posturing, wine flowing like waterfalls, and then a single guest crashing the party without an invite. Eris, goddess of strife, because nothing says Greek myth quite like drama sneaking in the side door. Eris, bitter about not being included, tosses a golden apple into the crowd. Not just any apple, it's inscribed to the fairest, which is ancient divine speak for, "Let's ruin everything, immediately." 3 goddesses lock eyes. Hera, queen of marriage, who believes she deserves it on seniority alone. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, who thinks logic and battlefield strategy qualify her. And, of course, Aphrodite, who doesn't think she knows. But the gods, too savvy or too cowardly to decide, push the choice onto Paris, a Trojan prince moonlighting as a shepherd, because apparently royal internships weren't a thing. Paris is handsome, gullible, and utterly unqualified to judge a celestial beauty contest. That's why he's perfect. Each goddess offers him a bribe. Hera promises power, he'll rule over all of Asia. Athena promises wisdom and victory, he'll never lose a battle. But Aphrodite, she whispers a name into his ear. Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful mortal woman alive. Aphrodite doesn't offer kingdoms or conquests. She offers obsession. Lust wrapped in love's costume. The kind of promise you don't examine too closely because it already owns you. And Paris, predictably, gives her the apple. In that moment, the world breaks a little. What he doesn't know yet, what you can probably already feel coming, is that Helen isn't exactly single, or available, or his to claim. She's married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta, and this little pageant decision just lit the fuse on a war that will last 10 years and kill thousands. Now, here's your sensual historical echo. Medieval Europe had its own version of Paris's blunder, only it played out in real bedrooms, not myths. King Philip IV of France had a scandalous rivalry with Pope Boniface VIII, which included weaponized sex accusations. The Pope was accused of keeping male lovers, including a young courtesan disguised as a page. The source, political propaganda. But behind the slander was a pattern leaders using beauty and sexuality not just to gain favor, but to destroy reputations. In both myth and history, desire becomes a landmine step wrong, and the fallout's national. And here's a quirky tangent in some fringe readings of the myth. Aphrodite's apple contest was actually staged by Zeus as a cosmic prank to thin the human population, which he felt had gotten out of hand. That's right, one theory suggests the Trojan War was a divine culling effort dressed in lipstick. Historians still argue whether these stories were moral warnings or just poetic excuses for real-world violence. Back in Mythland, you can almost see Aphrodite watching Paris with amusement. He's about to commit royal adultery, abduct a queen, and spark one of the bloodiest conflicts in literature, all because she told him he could. And she's not even flustered. She knows Helen will go, or at least not resist hard enough to stop it. Not because Paris is irresistible, he's more like a sentient jawline, but because Aphrodite has woven desire around Helen's mind like a silk veil. This is the part ancient storytellers didn't bother to sugarcoat love. When manipulated, turns into a weapon. Aphrodite doesn't care about the fallout. She's playing chess on a board where the pieces bleed. Meanwhile, the other goddesses are furious. Hera vows revenge. Athena quietly recalculates her loyalty grid. Olympus becomes a cold war of whispered insults and passive-aggressive thunderstorms. And on Earth, ships begin to sail. Helen leaves with Paris, whether seduced, spellbound, or simply bored with Menelaus and Sparta, screams betrayal. Menelaus, humiliated and enraged, calls in his brother Agamemnon, king of kings, to rally the other Greek leaders. Remember those suitors Helen had before marrying Menelaus. Turns out they all swore an oath to protect her marriage, and now it's payback time. Oaths in myth are like mortgages. You forget about them until they ruin your life. So now, a beauty contest morphs into a military campaign. Thousands of men kings, warriors, poets, tricksters assemble to bring one woman home, or, depending on the source, to claim glory, loot Troy, or just settle old scores. But officially, it's all about rescuing Helen. Because nothing justifies slaughter quite like love. And here's the twisted irony. Aphrodite will protect Paris throughout the war. She doesn't just set the fire, she tends it. In one battle, Paris nearly dies, until Aphrodite literally plucks him from the battlefield like a claw machine prize and drops him into his bedchamber. The other gods laugh. The mortals curse. And Aphrodite, she fluffs his pillow. You don't get to choose what love protects. Sometimes it's the fool who started it all. Modern scholars sometimes argue whether Helen was a historical figure at all. Was she a real queen? A symbolic cipher. An invention to justify an economic invasion. The debate goes in circles, but whether or not she walked the earth, Helen lives because Aphrodite made her desirable, and that desire made her dangerous. That's the formula beauty. Plus envy, multiplied by male pride, divided by divine meddling, equals 10 years of war. And you're only at the opening credits. Aphrodite doesn't sit this one out. She meddles constantly. She favors the Trojans mainly because Paris is her golden boy now, but she also stirs up fights between the other gods, like some wine-soaked wedding guest who can't stop comparing exes. She watches as mortals march, burn, fall, and still, she insists it's about love. That's what makes her so hard to pin down. She causes unspeakable suffering, but frames it as romantic destiny. She leaves a trail of corpses and calls it passion, and the poets eat it up. Homer doesn't paint her as evil. He paints her as inevitable. So tonight, as you drift further into myth's thick fog, consider this the greatest war story of the ancient world. Began with a petty squabble over who's prettiest, and the winner of that squabble, Aphrodite. But what she won wasn't peace or praise. She won Paris, a man so bland he could be background noise. And for that, a city will burn. You're sinking now, not drowning, just letting the weight of the story pull you deeper as the sails of 1,000 ships catch the wind. The sky darkens with omens. The sea churns with fate. The Greeks are coming, and it's all because of Helen. The woman Aphrodite promised to Paris like a dinner reservation she didn't plan on canceling. The poets say her face launched those 1,000 ships. But let's be honest, it wasn't just her face. It was her status, her politics, her narrative usefulness, and yes, her beauty, which Aphrodite had supercharged like an Instagram filter on steroids. You glide now beside Helen, trapped in a gilded palace in Troy, wearing silks that itch and hosting banquets where the wine tastes like betrayal. She's not the villain, she's the excuse. Did she love Paris? Some versions say yes. Others insist she hated him. That Aphrodite forced her. That she spent her days weaving tapestries of war she couldn't stop. And her nights staring out at the sea, hoping the ships would sink before they arrived. But none of that mattered. The Greeks had already decided she was the prize, and they were coming to claim her. Menelaus, her wronged husband, leads the charge. Not for love, but for ego. You know the type. He's the guy who calls 5 mutual friends to shame you into answering his texts. But this is no petty breakup. This is divine warfare with a human body count. Achilles joins, famously invulnerable except for his heel, which sounds like a software bug, but ends up being a death sentence. Odysseus is there too, reluctantly, tricked into going by a plow test. Yes, really, he pretended to be insane, sowing salt into his fields, until someone threw his baby in front of the plow and he swerved. Instant draft. This is what passes for military recruitment under divine meddling. The Greeks gather at Aulis, and the winds go still. No movement, no breeze. The gods are moody, and Artemis is particularly offended, maybe because Agamemnon boasted about being a better hunter than her, or maybe because he killed one of her sacred deer. It's unclear. What is clear is that she demands a sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. Classic Greek parenting: sacrifice the kid to appease the weather. And here's where Aphrodite's fingerprints show, again. Some say she took pity and swapped Iphigenia with a deer at the last second, spiriting the girl away to serve as a priestess. Others say she did nothing. Either way, the Greeks finally get wind in their sails, and they set out across the wine-dark sea toward a decade of blood and bad decisions. Here's your sex story for the Section 1, ripped from the folds of royal scandal. Catherine the Great, often slandered for her libido, kept a rotating cast of male lovers whom she housed, dressed, and pensioned off when she tired of them. But what few know is that her advisors would vet potential lovers based on physical attributes and charm, reportedly testing them privately before recommending them. The echoes of Aphrodite here are unmistakable desire as both audition and into institution. Love reduced to loyalty programs. Aphrodite didn't create this model, but she'd approve of the chaos it leaves behind. Now imagine Troy. High walls, polished battlements, towers like teeth on the edge of a coastline where waves foam with unease. Inside those walls, Helen walks the corridors like a ghost. Some days, the Trojan women adore her. Other days, they curse her under their breath. She's not just a guest. She's a living symbol of impending doom. Aphrodite protects her, or claims to. Whenever Helen falters, considers leaving, remembers her daughter back in Sparta, Aphrodite appears, not in flashes of thunder or grand gestures, but quiet pressure, a shoulder touch, a reminder. "You love him," she whispers. Even if Helen isn't sure, Aphrodite doesn't ask for consent. She doesn't need it. She built the stage and cast the play. Historians still argue whether Helen was originally a goddess, later humanized for political storytelling. Some evidence suggests early cult worship at Sparta, where Helen wasn't a queen, but a deity of vegetation and renewal, later repackaged by poets into a cautionary tale. If that's true, then Aphrodite didn't seduce Helen, she absorbed her, made her a pawn, a duplicate, another mirror reflecting divine beauty with mortal cost. Meanwhile, in the Greek camp, tensions simmer. Men aren't dying for Helen. They're dying for pride, for legacy, for the chance to be sung about later by blind poets. Aphrodite's hand in this is subtle. She doesn't charge into battle. She slips into dreams. She tilts heads at just the wrong moment. She makes sure the wrong people fall for each other at the worst possible time. Paris avoids battle whenever possible, but when he does fight, Aphrodite saves him. Once, after he's nearly killed, she whisks him away mid-duel, drops him in bed, and orders Helen to go comfort him. When Helen resists, angry, ashamed, tired of being a consolation prize, Aphrodite snaps. "Don't provoke me," she says in Homer's Iliad. "I'll make you hate me more than you love him." That's not the language of a caring protector. That's an abuser's threat, and Helen obeys. Because when a goddess with your mind on a string tells you to smile, you smile. Here's a quirky footnote. Some ancient Vase paintings depict Helen with wings, not as an angelic figure, but as prey. The wings mark her as abducted. In Greek art, wings weren't for freedom, they were for capture, a reminder that Helen didn't fly. She was flown. By whom? Aphrodite? Maybe. Paris, certainly, but always, always away from her own choices. As the war drags on, Achilles kills Hector, Troy's greatest defender. The walls begin to crack, not physically, but morally. The Trojans question Paris. Helen questions herself. The Greeks bicker. Aphrodite watches. Her legacy builds, not in statues or scrolls, but in how desire warps decisions, how it makes people walk into fire smiling. You start to notice the shift. This isn't about Helen anymore. It never really was. It's about the gods using mortals like puppets in a love story where no one gets a happy ending. Aphrodite doesn't grieve. She doesn't age. She remains beautiful as ever, untouched by the chaos she orchestrates. That's the cruelest part, because mortals, unlike gods, have to live with the consequences or die from them. And yet, they still worship her. Even now. In songs, in art, in whispered wishes made during first dates or final goodbyes. She endures, not because she's kind, but because she's real. Not in form, but in force. Every time someone ruins their life for someone they barely know. That's Aphrodite. Every ill-advised text at 2 a.m. Every wedding sparked by rebound romance. Every nation that cloaks conquest in the name of love. Aphrodite nods quietly from Olympus. You may never meet her, but you've felt her. Now you're walking the shore at dusk, watching the flames of Greek campfires flicker like 1,000 restless eyes, each one reflecting some soldier's private war. The war for Helen has become background noise, white-hot and constant. But the real drama simmers behind closed tents and between clenched teeth. Because Menelaus, the husband, the wounded party, the so-called moral high ground, is not handling this well. He wanted his wife back. Yes, but he also wanted the kind of revenge that sings. Helen's departure wasn't just a betrayal. It was public humiliation. And in a society obsessed with honor and legacy, being cucked by a smooth-cheeked Trojan prince in eyeliner was a scandal with a capital S. So Menelaus doesn't just fight for love. He fights to restore his bruised ego. And here's the tragic part. Even if he wins, even if he drags Helen back across the sea, the damage is already done. Every man in camp knows. Every bard in Greece is rehearsing the tale. He'll never be just a king again. He'll always be the guy whose wife chose someone else. And Aphrodite, she's quietly sipping ambrosia, watching Menelaus spiral, amused at how one bruised male ego can keep a decade-long bloodbath fueled and flaming. This is her specialty, the little spark that makes men burn their empires to the ground over feelings they can't name. You watch as Menelaus sharpens his spear with unnecessary vigor, as if violence can grind away shame. But Helen remains elusive. Is she in love with Paris? Imprisoned, enchanted? The myths shift, depending on who's telling them. Some versions even say a phantom of Helen stayed in Troy, while the real woman was whisked away to Egypt for safekeeping. That's right. In one retelling, they're all killing each other over a literal mirage. Historians still argue whether this was a narrative loophole to soften Helen's betrayal or a metaphor for how people fall in love with illusions, not realities. Either way, Aphrodite's influence is clear love. As she wields it, is never about truth. It's about perception. Now here's your sex story of the night. One that unspools like a royal fever dream. Let's talk about Elagabalus, the Roman emperor, whose reign was a chaotic cocktail of religious upheaval, fashion crimes, and unorthodox bedroom behavior. Elagabalus, though not Greek, mirrored the same divine entanglement of sex and power that Aphrodite embodied. He famously married a Vestal virgin sacrilegious by any standard, and declared himself the wife of his male charioteer, insisting on being addressed as a woman. He even reportedly asked surgeons to give him female anatomy, making him a kind of ancient transgender pioneer, or at least a deeply misunderstood queer monarch. His sexuality wasn't just personal, it was public, performative, and politically radioactive, just like Aphrodite. Elagabalus weaponized allure and shattered every category people tried to box him into. He was both adored and assassinated. Because empires, much like gods, don't tolerate that kind of chaos for long. Back at the Greek camp, the political machinery keeps grinding. Menelaus is just one gear. His brother Agamemnon is the war's de facto CEO, the kind of man who sees people as assets and battlefields, as spreadsheets. He doesn't care about Helen. He cares about control. And control, when threatened, lashes out. That's why he steals Achilles' war prize, Briseis, a decision so colossally stupid it nearly collapses the Greek army. Achilles throws a fit worthy of a daytime soap opera, refuses to fight, and sulks in his tent for chapters. But underneath the tantrum is a truth the myths never quite admit men. Even heroes are fragile when it comes to love, or what they think is love. Aphrodite doesn't appear in these scenes, but you feel her fingerprints. When Achilles mourns Patroclus later, tearing his hair and smearing himself in ash, it's not just grief, it's devotion, and possibly something deeper, something more intimate. Scholars debate it to this day. Were they lovers? Close friends? Brothers in arms in the most emotionally intense sense? The Greeks didn't draw neat lines, and Aphrodite didn't either. She let people feel everything, all at once, with no off switch. And now a quirky detail. Some ancient Greeks believed that love wasn't located in the heart, but in the liver. That's right, the liver. They thought it was the seat of passions, especially destructive ones. When someone fell in love, it was their liver that suffered, swelled, burned. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong. Maybe love does do something chemical, something bodily, something deep in the dark where no logic can reach. Meanwhile, Menelaus keeps pushing. Battles rage. Men fall. Paris, the spark of this whole mess, keeps dodging real combat, hiding behind walls and waiting for Aphrodite to bail him out. But eventually, it's time. Menelaus and Paris meet on the battlefield for a one-on-one duel. Winner gets Helen. Simple. Clean. A mythic face-off. And it starts well enough. Menelaus wounds Paris, drags him by the helmet strap toward death. The crowd holds its breath. Then, poof, Aphrodite intervenes. Again, she snaps the helmet strap, spirits Paris away, and dumps him in Helen's bedroom like a soggy loaf of bread. And here's the kicker. She tells Helen to go lie with him. Helen resists, not because she fears Aphrodite, but because she's furious. She's been reduced to a trophy again, a bargaining chip, a woman with no agency, passed back and forth by men and gods like a golden apple. And Aphrodite threatens her. Again, don't make me angry. She warns, you don't want to see what happens when I'm angry. That's not love. That's coercion. But that's the kind of goddess Aphrodite is. She doesn't ask. She compels. She doesn't love gently. She overwhelms, even when she's not present. Her legacy operates like background radiation. Menelaus returns to camp empty-handed. Paris lies in bed pretending to be heroic. Helen, well, Helen stares at the ceiling, wondering how many more men have to die in her name before someone realizes none of this was ever really about her. And yet, the war continues. Not because it has to, but because no one knows how to stop it without admitting they were wrong. And that's the real tragedy of Aphrodite's kind of love. It doesn't fade. It calcifies. It turns into something you keep doing long after the desire is gone, just to avoid feeling foolish. Menelaus, in his heart, may already know Helen won't love him the way he wants, but he'd rather burn a city than admit he lost. You float now among the campfires, warm and bitter. You hear the laughter of soldiers who'll die tomorrow, the soft shuffle of Helen's slippers on stone floors, the indifferent rustle of Aphrodite's gown as she passes unseen. She doesn't linger. She doesn't grieve. She just smiles. Because this is what she does best. Break the world. Beautifully. You find yourself now slipping behind the walls of Troy, through the marble corridors and smoke-sweet courtyards, where Paris lounges with the kind of smug serenity only a man both handsome and oblivious can maintain. The city around him braces for impact. Fathers sharpen blades. Mothers hoard grain. Priests chant to gods who haven't returned their calls in years. But Paris, he thinks this is still a love story, and Aphrodite encourages that delusion like a parent clapping for a child's terrible finger painting, because he's not a warrior. He's not even particularly bright. He's a vessel for her vanity project, a human reminder that even among gods, a pretty face still holds currency. You pass him reclining beside Helen, fingers tracing the edge of her wrist, like that will erase the 10,000 corpses piling up because of them. Helen doesn't look at him. She's been staring into the same corner of the ceiling for what might be days. Not because she doesn't care, but because caring has become a luxury she can't afford. When you're the cause of a war, every breath starts to feel like collateral damage. And Aphrodite, true to form, makes sure Helen stays just enchanted enough not to run. That's her talent. Not brute force. Influence. A mood that changes rooms. A perfume that lingers in your thoughts. But let's pan out. Aphrodite's interference in Troy isn't isolated. She's active, omnipresent, always testing the boundaries of love and loyalty. And her most chaotic maneuver, her influence over Achilles, the deadliest Greek on the field. Achilles doesn't care about Helen. He doesn't even care much about the war. What drives him is pride, glory, and, eventually, grief. But Aphrodite's fingerprints are there too, indirectly, nudging characters into collisions they can't avoid. Remember how Achilles refused to fight after Agamemnon stole Briseis. That wasn't just a tactical standoff. That was an emotional meltdown. And if you squint, you can see how Aphrodite's influence, her mythic aura of love, desire, possessiveness, has trickled into even the most war-hardened minds. She doesn't show up for him the way she does for Paris or Helen. But her power doesn't need to be obvious. When your brand is irresistible attraction, your influence spreads whether you're invited or not. Now, here's tonight's requisite sex story. From a time and place you probably didn't expect, the royal courts of India. In the ancient Kama Sutra, love wasn't simply emotional or erotic, it was strategic. Kings employed women trained in the arts of seduction, not just for pleasure, but for diplomacy. These courtesans, educated and skilled, could recite poetry, critique philosophy, and stage elaborate performances designed to sway rival factions or foreign envoys. In other words, Aphrodite wasn't just a Western phenomenon. Cultures across the ancient world understood that beauty and desire, when wielded intelligently, could win wars before a single arrow was fired. It wasn't about being sexy. It was about being the storm disguised as an invitation. Meanwhile, the Greeks outside Troy continue their slow grind. The siege has become routine. Sacrifices, skirmishes, days where nothing happens but tension, the kind that thickens the air, makes your skin itch. And within that lull, new dramas bloom. Aphrodite might be a goddess of love, but she has an accomplice, Eros. You know him. Chubby, winged, bow in hand. But don't let the hallmark image fool you. Eros isn't cute. He's terrifying. His arrows don't inspire affection. They enforce compulsion. And at Aphrodite's request, he's already messed with far too many minds in this story. Some say Eros made Helen fall for Paris in the first place. Others say he keeps Achilles' emotions so tightly wound around Patroclus that when Patroclus dies, Achilles practically transforms into a force of nature. Historians still argue whether the Eros myth was meant to be literal or allegorical. But one thing's certain when Eros draws his bow, the fallout is never romantic. It's catastrophic. Now, here's your fringe tidbit, one of those strange, dusty details the textbooks don't linger on. In some Greek cults, especially in more rural or fringe regions, Aphrodite was worshipped alongside death gods. That's right, Aphrodite and Hades, the love goddess and the lord of the underworld, sharing altar space. But because love and death weren't opposites, they were cousins. Both represented transformations. Both brought people to their knees. And both, once touched, could not be undone. Scholars still debate what these rituals looked like. Were they fertility rites, mourning ceremonies, erotic trances? The records are unclear, but the symbolism remains sharp. To love someone, truly and irrationally, is to watch the self die a little. And Aphrodite, ever the queen of bittersweet things, ruled that threshold with a smile. Back in Troy, Paris begins to falter. He's not a fighter, and even with divine backup, his cowardice starts to weigh on his people. His brother Hector, noble and doomed, fights like a man who knows the gods aren't on his side. Aphrodite doesn't protect Hector. That job belongs to Apollo. But she watches, always. When Hector falls to Achilles, dragged around the walls of Troy, it's not just a turning point in the war, it's a crack in the illusion Aphrodite built. Suddenly, love doesn't feel powerful. It feels pathetic. The city realizes that no divine promise, no golden apple, can save them from what's coming. Even Helen feels it. She starts visiting Hector's widow, Andromache, offering comfort. She brings gifts, tries to help, tries to be useful, but it's too late. Aphrodite's game has gone too far. Helen is still beautiful, but now people see the cost. The glamour has dulled. Her dresses look heavier. The whispers follow her through the halls. And yet, she stays, or is made to stay. No one quite knows. And Aphrodite, she's still spinning her web. Even as the Greeks prepare their final trick, the wooden horse, she lets things unravel with practiced grace. She knows. She always knows. But she lets it happen anyway. Because love, in her world, isn't about saving people. It's about watching them fall and calling it destiny. Aphrodite's version of love is not the warm, nurturing glow people crave. It's the fevered edge of obsession. It's the reason Paris never grew up, the reason Helen never escaped, the reason mortals and immortals alike confuse possession with affection. And if that all sounds familiar, if you've ever chased someone who didn't care, or stayed too long in something that hurt. Well, that's Aphrodite too. Not because she's cruel, but because she teaches the hard lessons. Love isn't fair. It isn't clean. It isn't even always kind. But it moves the world. And so, you settle into the crumbling grandeur of Troy, hearing the whispers of gods and mortals alike, the footsteps of fate echoing in streets soon to be ash. The city sleeps uneasily. The Greeks load their horse with warriors. And Aphrodite, she brushes Helen's hair, hums a lullaby only goddesses know, and waits for the next beautiful disaster. You're perched now on a rooftop in Troy, just before dawn, the kind of hour when dreams decay into fog, and even the gods get quiet. Below you, the wooden horse looms in the city square, absurd and enormous, a gift from the Greeks who have supposedly sailed away in surrender. The Trojans, exhausted by war, drunk on premature relief, swarm around the thing like it's a party favor, not a trap. You already know what's inside. But they don't. And more importantly, they don't want to know. After 10 years of fighting, people will believe anything that feels like closure, even if it's made of hollow pine and bad decisions. But someone does suspect. Laocoon, the priest, warns them. Beware Greeks bearing gifts, he says. But then, sea serpents slither out of the water and strangle him and his sons on the beach like a mythic Yelp review. The people take that as a sign from the gods, from fate, from somewhere above that the horse must be safe. So they drag it inside. And the clock starts ticking. Aphrodite, of course, is watching. She doesn't ride the horse. She doesn't sharpen the swords. But she's the reason it's necessary. Because this war was never about land or trade routes. It was about honor disguised as romance, about desire turned into duty. And it all traces back to her whisper in Paris's ear. The moment she told him Helen could be his, that single seduction has now burned through a generation. Troy doesn't fall tonight because of cleverness or trickery. It falls because Aphrodite understood people better than any war god ever could. She knew what made men chase impossible things. She knew they'd kill for it, die for it, and call it love. And while Troy slumbers, the Greeks emerge from the horse, silent, swift, practiced. They open the gates. The army rushes in. What follows is not poetry. It's panic, rape, murder. Looting no gods intervene this time. Or if they do so silently, through the shaking hands of soldiers and the glint of torches on marble. Priam is butchered at his altar. Children are thrown from towers. Cassandra screams prophecies no one hears. It's brutal. It's final. And Helen stands still in the chaos, untouched, unscathed. Aphrodite's prize. Still beautiful, still shimmering. Some say she was hidden away. Others say she walked calmly to the Greek ships. Menelaus's hand on her arm, like a leash he couldn't quite grip. Here's the twist when Menelaus finally confronts her. Sword raised, ready to avenge a decade of humiliation. He drops it. Because she's too beautiful. Because she drops her robe. Or blinks the right way. Or says something only they understand. The sources disagree, but the outcome is clear. He takes her back. Now your sex story. Let's go to France. To the court of Louis XV, where Madame de Pompadour, his official mistress, redefined state-sponsored seduction. She wasn't just a lover. She was a political advisor, cultural curator, and brand strategist for the monarchy. When their sexual relationship waned, she remained at court as a companion, and confidant, recruiting younger women to satisfy the king's appetites while she managed his image and influence. It's twisted, yes, but also revealing. Power, sex, and affection weren't separate lanes. They were braided, inextricable, and Madame de Pompadour understood that being adored meant staying relevant. Sound familiar? That's Aphrodite's entire operating system: control through allure, loyalty through obsession. Even when the fire goes out, the smoke still keeps you coughing. Let's zoom back in. Troy is burning. The air is thick with screams and ash. And Aphrodite, she's not gloating. She's bored. This phase of the story is over. Her influence has already taken root elsewhere. She'll linger. Maybe she might help Aeneas escape, carrying his father on his back, because he's her mortal son, and she's nothing if not inconsistently maternal. But for the most part, she's already moved on. She doesn't mourn the dead. She collects the survivors, plants seeds of future empires. But Helen, she boards the ship back to Greece with eyes that don't blink. Did she love Paris? Probably not anymore. Did she hate Menelaus? Probably. A little. But she's learned the truth of Aphrodite's gift being desired is a kind of prison. Everyone wants you, but no one sees you. You become a canvas for projection, a reason for someone else's crusade. And now, after all this death, Helen is still beautiful. That's the curse. She has to carry that beauty, and the ruin it caused, all the way home. Now for a peculiar tidbit in some obscure versions of the myth. Helen wasn't punished. She was worshipped. In Sparta, a cult formed around her, where women prayed for grace, beauty, and safe childbirth. Helen the goddess, not the adulteress. It's a full circle moment. The mortal who caused a war becomes divine. Historians still argue whether this was damage control or genuine reverence, but the symbolism holds. In a world where women's value was tied to appearance, Helen became both warning and aspiration. And Aphrodite, she just watched the transformation happen. She's used to it. She's been rebranded more times than a pop star. From Cypriot fertility idol, to Homeric temptress, to Roman Venus, to Renaissance muse. Her story flexes with the times, but her core remains beauty that bends the world. Back on the boat, Helen and Menelaus don't talk much. What is there to say? He won. She survived. Neither of them are happy, but they're legends now. That's what Aphrodite trades in. Not peace, not resolution, but story. Your memory of love, not the real thing, the cinematic version, edited and gilded, with the pain cropped out, and people keep buying it. So as you drift into sleep, through smoke and seawater, through Helen's silence and Menelaus's hollow victory, remember this. Troy didn't fall because of tactics or heroes. It fell because one goddess knew how to set desire loose like wildfire and let it do the rest. She didn't need armies. She only needed you to want something so badly you'd break the world to get it. And the worst part, you'd still call it love. Now you're standing in Olympus, behind the heavy golden columns of a throne room that always smells faintly of smoke and sweat. The war is over down below, but up here, it's barely begun. Because when Aphrodite meddled in mortal love, she didn't just incinerate Troy, she also shattered the glass-thin truce among the gods. What started as petty rivalry over an apple has exploded into full-blown marital chaos, sibling drama, and some extremely awkward divine dinner parties. The gods, for all their power, are still painfully human when it comes to jealousy. And nowhere does that sting more than in Hera's glare. She still hasn't forgiven Aphrodite for winning the beauty contest, or for using that win to upend the delicate, passive-aggressive pecking order of Olympus. Imagine being the queen of the gods and having to share the table with your husband's ex, your husband's crush, and your husband's probable next mistake, all wrapped into one goddess who never apologizes for anything. Hera isn't subtle. She starts throwing thunderous shade, and, occasionally, chairs. One time, literally, according to one lesser-known myth, during an argument with Zeus about Aphrodite's latest stunt, Hera hurled an entire bronze dining bench across the hall. It cracked a pillar. No one said a word. The tension in Olympus gets so thick you could stir it with a trident. And while Hera simmers, Athena isn't exactly doing trust falls with Aphrodite either. The virgin goddess of wisdom and war finds everything about her rival distasteful. The nudity, the seductions, the chaos dressed as charm. If Athena represents order, Aphrodite is entropy with lipstick. Their rivalry isn't loud. It's cold, calculated, and eternal. You don't get catfights. You get centuries of undermining, whispers, and philosophical rebuttals masked as poetry. But Zeus, he's a different story. He knows Aphrodite is dangerous, but he also knows she's useful. She can smooth over political alliances with a wink. She can distract enemies with lust, and allies with love. And most importantly, she's not loyal to anyone. That makes her manageable, as long as she's amused. So he lets her play, even when it gets messy. Especially when it gets messy. Now it's time for tonight's sex story, and this one might surprise you. From Michel Foucault's The History of Sexuality. We learned that ancient Roman and Greek societies didn't categorize sex based on orientation the way we do today. Instead, it was all about dominance and role. The dominant, penetrating partner was seen as powerful, whether male or female, while the passive role, especially for men, was socially complicated. That meant a senator could have male lovers without shame, as long as he was the one in control. This didn't make him gay. In their terms, it made him powerful. Aphrodite, as the goddess of love and erotic force, existed outside these binaries. She could stir desire in anyone, for anyone, and she did. Her influence blurred categories, made labels useless. In that way, she was more modern than most of us are comfortable admitting. Now back to Olympus, where things are about to get scandalous. Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus. Yes, but she's also very publicly sleeping with Ares, the god of war. It's not even a subtle affair. Ares shows up late to meetings smelling like myrrh and victory. Aphrodite emerges from temples with armor marks on her hips. Everyone knows. Hephaestus especially. And so he does what any brilliant, bitter craftsman would do. He builds a trap. A net. Not just any net, but a nearly invisible golden one. Forged with divine precision. Designed to catch the lovers mid-act. And it works. One day, just as Ares and Aphrodite are getting reacquainted on a sunbeam-soaked bed, the net snaps into place. They're caught, tangled like fish in a poem. And then Hephaestus calls the entire pantheon to witness. That's right, a divine walk of shame. Mid-coitus, all the gods arrive. Hermes, Poseidon, Apollo, they laugh. They gawk. They make crude jokes. The goddesses don't attend, either out of dignity or strategic avoidance. But the point is made. Even Aphrodite can be humiliated. But here's the twist. She isn't. She doesn't blush. She doesn't cry. She just lifts her chin and lets them look. Because to her, shame isn't a thing. She knows her power doesn't come from hiding. It comes from owning it. And even tangled in Hephaestus's golden trap, she still looks divine. Some versions say Poseidon negotiates her release. Others say Zeus just gets tired of the spectacle. But one thing's clear, she goes right back to being Aphrodite. She doesn't beg. She doesn't change. She simply moves on. Her myth intact. That's what makes her untouchable. You can mock her, trap her, expose her, but you can't reduce her. She doesn't break. Here's a fringe detail for the night. Some ancient cults of Aphrodite included ritual bathing with crocodile dung and fermented honey as love potions. The dung, mixed with spices, was believed to ward off disease and promote fertility. Was it effective? Probably not. Was it committed? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether these rituals were symbolic or practical. But the faith was there. Love makes people do strange things, sometimes glamorous, sometimes absurd. And Aphrodite, goddess of both perfume and poop paste, ruled over all of it. Back on Olympus, the aftermath of the affair lingers. Hephaestus refuses to take her back. Ares gets sent to the metaphorical doghouse. But Aphrodite, she keeps her temple, her worshippers, her influence, because gods might squabble, but mortals never stop needing her. In a world where wars are constant and mortality is short, the hunger for love, for beauty, for closeness never dies. And Aphrodite never runs out of people willing to offer their hearts, even when she treats those hearts like playthings. You drift now through the halls of Olympus as the gods return to their business, pretending nothing happened. But the air crackles with tension. Alliances have shifted, rivalries have deepened, and Aphrodite, once again, walks away from the wreckage without a scratch. That's her superpower. Not immortality, not seduction, survival. She thrives in scandal. She feeds on chaos. And somehow, she always makes you feel like it was your idea to fall. You curl into that idea, soft and unsettling, as the firelight of Olympus flickers out. Down below, mortals worship her. Up here, gods fear her. And somewhere in the middle, you begin to wonder if love can't be trusted. What exactly is it good for? You drift into a warm room now, velvet and dark, where the air smells faintly of rose oil and heated bronze. There's laughter behind the silk curtains, hushed and scandalous. Welcome to Aphrodite's personal office hours, which, let's be honest, are more like after hours. Tonight, she's not playing diplomat or saboteur. She's doing what she loves best, loving someone she really shouldn't. His name is Ares, god of war, and their chemistry is less candlelit romance and more house on fire. Hephaestus, her official husband, is nowhere in sight. He's probably downstairs hammering out vengeance and jewelry. But Ares, he's already shedding his armor like a man who doesn't plan to sleep or survive through the night. You watch them for a moment, the way they orbit each other. Their energy isn't soft, it's volcanic. They aren't opposites. They're mirror images wearing different expressions. She destroys with desire, he with violence, but both are inevitable. Their affair is no secret. Every god knows. Every mortal who prays in temples to Aphrodite imagines it. And yet it keeps happening. Not out of love, necessarily, but out of something messier, need, indulgence. The echoing drumbeat of knowing someone sees you exactly as you are and doesn't flinch. Ares doesn't worship her. He doesn't try to control her. He lets her be Aphrodite, and that may be the closest thing to affection she ever allows. But that doesn't mean it's safe, because their love, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't stay in private. It infects. People emulate what gods model, and soon, cities are echoing their entanglement. Soldiers believe battle is a form of seduction. Lovers think jealousy is proof of passion. Couples fight like it's foreplay. Aphrodite and Ares become the divine poster children for love that burns through its own foundations. Romantic, maybe. Healthy? Absolutely not. Here's your sex story for the night, an artifact from The Erotic Spirit Through History, where Peter Webb describes the love life of Empress Theodora of Byzantium, who began her career in burlesque and ended it as co-ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. Before marrying Emperor Justinian, Theodora starred in public pantomimes, some of which were notorious for their sexual explicitness. One story describes her reenacting Leda and the Swan, with real birds and no shame. But Theodora, like Aphrodite, wielded sexuality like a blade. She seduced, yes, but she also governed. After marriage, she helped pass laws protecting women from trafficking and exploitation. She was both scandal and sanctuary. That's what makes the comparison sting. Aphrodite could have been a protector, too. But she rarely chose that path. She chose spectacle, and sometimes that spectacle hurt more than it healed. Now back to Olympus, where Ares and Aphrodite's affair continues to generate passive-aggressive headlines. Hephaestus may be publicly embarrassed, but he's not powerless. He withdraws from the divine social circuit, dives into his forge, and builds things. Weapons, jewelry, unbreakable chains. One day, he crafts a belt for Aphrodite, a beautiful golden girdle, rumored to make anyone who sees her instantly desire her. She wears it. The world tilts. Some versions say she already had this magic. Others say the belt just intensified it. Either way, it's the ancient world's first wearable thirst trap, and it works. Mortals and gods alike fall harder, faster, more foolishly than ever. She becomes unstoppable. The gods argue about it. Of course, Hera tries to borrow it. Zeus bans it, then forgets he banned it. The belt is blamed for everything from wars to weddings, depending on who's narrating. But the truth is simpler. People were always going to fall. The belt just took off the brakes. And now for your quirky tidbit. The ancient Greeks believed Aphrodite could control not just human love, but nature itself through desire. There are records, albeit sparse and probably metaphorical, that suggest farmers prayed to her for fertile crops, hoping that arousal energy might coax the soil into blooming. Some even performed symbolic sex rituals in the fields. Yes, really. Historians still debate whether these were literal fertility rites or just poetic allegories. But the connection was clear. Love wasn't confined to bedrooms. It moved in the grain, the rain, the pulse of spring. Aphrodite wasn't just about romance. She was about life force, ungovernable and lush. Now, back to the mess. Ares and Aphrodite's affair eventually produces children some of the wildest in the pantheon. There's Eros, of course, god of desire, who makes people fall in love against their will. There's Deimos and Phobos, twin embodiments of terror and panic, who follow their father into battle. It's poetic, if you think about it. The children of love and war are fear and chaos. Aphrodite doesn't raise them, not in any modern sense. Gods rarely parent, but she's responsible for them, in that divine way that echoes through generations. Every time a heart races with want, or a soldier charges into battle drunk on adrenaline, her family legacy pulses in the background. But she doesn't slow down, doesn't pause. Because to Aphrodite, life is movement, flirtation, a game where everyone plays and no one wins. She doesn't believe in stillness, or fidelity, or tidy endings. And that's where the other gods struggle to understand her. They keep expecting logic. But love isn't logical. That's her power. That's her defense. She cannot be argued with because she isn't reason. She's reaction. Even Zeus, king of all things, once made the mistake of underestimating her. Tired of her antics, he forced her to fall in love with a mortal Anchises, a shepherd with good cheekbones and bad luck. Aphrodite resisted, but the spell took. She sought him out, disguised herself as mortal, seduced him in a field at dawn, and conceived Aeneas, future founder of Rome. When she revealed herself afterward, Anchises panicked. He begged not to be punished. He asked if he would live. She laughed, said maybe, then left. Some say he was struck by lightning for bragging. Others say he just walked crooked ever after. But that's Aphrodite's version of a love story. Gorgeous. Impossible. And over before you can blink. And now you understand. She doesn't do closure. She leaves halfway through the second act and expects you to keep clapping. She kisses you once and vanishes for a decade. Her love isn't a promise. It's a dare. So you drift now through the haze of divine entanglement, watching Ares sharpen his sword, while Aphrodite sharpens her gaze. They'll do this forever. Fall together. Burn together. Pretend it's new, each time. And mortals will copy them. We always do. We confuse obsession with intimacy, fire with warmth, and then we call it fate. You're drifting now through a city not yet built, across the dry dust of mythic battlefields and the half-whispered plans of men who dream of empires. The war over Troy is ash in the wind, but the world doesn't slow down. It reshapes, because while Aphrodite burned one city to the ground, she's already laying the foundations for another. That's the trick with love. When it's wielded by a goddess, it never stays in one place. It wanders, it haunts, and sometimes it rebuilds. The Greek heroes scatter, cursed and glorious. Odysseus sails off into a series of misadventures that would make any therapist retire. Menelaus and Helen return to Sparta, where they pretend to be happy until time forgets them. But one figure drags his injured father through the flames, child at his side, gaze fixed on the western stars Aeneas, Aphrodite's mortal son. She watches him not with a mother's softness, but with investment. Because Aeneas isn't just a survivor, he's a seed. You sail with him now, over strange seas and stranger lands, carried by prophecies and divine nudges. Aphrodite doesn't appear often in his story, but she's always there, twisting fate, calming tempests, steering his path toward what will one day become Rome. Because that's what she does. She doesn't just ruin cities. She plants legacies. You thought she was the goddess of brief flings and stolen kisses, but she's playing the long game. You don't get to have love without empire. And vice versa. Here's your historical sex story, this one from Sex with Kings. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France, allegedly maintained a stable of attractive young men in the Louvre who were instructed in erotic arts by older courtesans. Why? So they could serve as sexual spies, charming noblewomen, gathering secrets, love as espionage, lust as politics. Aphrodite would have adored it. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was efficient. If people are going to fall, Make sure they fall for the right reasons, or at least the useful ones. Now, let's talk tactics. The Greeks, for all their military grandeur, never fought clean. They seduced. They schemed. They whispered promises before battles, invoked gods before decisions, and left room in every plan for lust to do its work. Aphrodite wasn't just worshipped with incense and flowers. She was honored through strategy. It was common. For example, for warriors to enter sacred spaces to receive blessings of attraction or sexual charm before negotiations. Not because they were vain, but because they understood that sometimes the most effective battlefield is the bedroom. And let's not forget the sacred band of Thebes, a troop of 150 male lovers who fought side by side, believing that love made them invincible. They weren't worshipping Ares, they were channeling Aphrodite. Love made them fight harder, shield stronger, die slower. The Greeks didn't draw hard lines between sex and power. Love and battle. Aphrodite wasn't a sideshow. She was an asset. Here's your quirky footnote in some Athenian military manuals. Soldiers were advised to wear special amulets blessed by priestesses of Aphrodite before departing for long campaigns. These weren't charms for safety, they were charms for fidelity. Yes, the Greek army had divine-issued anti-cheating tokens. Historians still argue whether these were symbolic, or if soldiers actually believed their loins would shrivel without divine permission. Either way, it's peak Aphrodite micromanaging affairs, both foreign and domestic. Now back to Rome, or the idea of it. Aeneas eventually lands in Italy, but not before stopping in Carthage. And this is where Aphrodite plays one of her dirtiest cards. Queen Dido rules Carthage with competence and charisma. She's powerful, unmarried, and dangerously in control of her own narrative. Aphrodite can't have that. So she orders her son, Cupid, yes, same Eros, different branding to strike Dido with desire for Aeneas. She doesn't just fall, she implodes. They make love in a cave during a storm, a scene that blurs divine manipulation and raw emotion so thoroughly you forget they barely know each other. Dido builds temples in Aeneas' honor. She gives him part of her soul, her city, her name, and when he leaves, because destiny waits in Italy, she burns everything, including herself. It's not tragic because she loved. It's tragic because she never stood a chance. Aphrodite didn't just want Aeneas to move forward. She wanted to make sure no one could follow. Dido becomes a cautionary tale. Her ashes the fuel for future wars between Rome and Carthage. Again, love leads to conflict. Again, Aphrodite doesn't blink. And here's where it all starts to crystallize. You thought Aphrodite caused wars by accident, but now you're beginning to suspect she always knew. That maybe her chaos wasn't incidental. Maybe it was the point. She doesn't just make people fall in love. She makes them fall into obsession, into possession, into belief systems they'd kill for. She turns intimacy into ideology, and then watches as civilizations build monuments atop it. Even Julius Caesar claimed descent from her, through Aeneas, through Venus. That's how powerful the myth became. By the time Rome takes center stage, Aphrodite has a makeover new name, new costume, same agenda. She becomes Venus, goddess of love, beauty, fertility, victory. Emperors invoke her. Generals pray to her before campaigns. She becomes sanitized, imperial, corporate. But beneath the marble and gold, she's still the same girl rising from sea foam, laughing at your attempt to make love orderly. You float now between histories, between myth and statecraft, as temples rise in her name, as soldiers carve her symbol into their swords, as lovers whisper her prayers in secret. Her influence is no longer confined to flirtations and affairs. It's in treaties. It's in dynasties. Every time someone says, "I'd die for love," she smiles, because that's exactly the point. And maybe you start to feel it, that tug behind your ribs, that ache that isn't hunger or fear. It's longing, not for a person, but for something bigger, something consuming. Aphrodite lives in that ache, and she isn't going anywhere. You wake up in marble shadow, somewhere between myth and memory, walking barefoot across a tiled floor, slick with rose petals and melted incense. The echoes of sandals and whispered names follow you down the long halls of a temple, not just any temple, but one of Aphrodite's. You can't tell which city. Could be Corinth, or Paphos, or Eryx. They all start to blur. These shrines to a goddess who doesn't believe in privacy. Everywhere there are statues of her draped, nude, adorned with gold, or crumbling with time, but always unmistakably her. The eyes tilt down, the mouth hovers between smirk and sigh. Even in stone, she judges you. You're not praying right. You're not loving hard enough. You're trying too hard to be rational. And that's not how this works. Because in these temples, something stranger is happening. The line between the sacred and the sensual isn't blurred. It's obliterated. You pass a pair of young women arranging offerings, fruits and perfumes, and carefully coiled ropes of hair. They're priestesses, technically, but their duties go far beyond lighting candles. In Aphrodite's temples, especially in cities like Corinth and Cyprus, some priestesses were also sacred sex workers. It wasn't taboo. It was divine. Sleep with one, and you weren't just satisfying yourself, you were communing with the goddess. You were reenacting the moment of creation, aligning yourself with cosmic desire. It sounds poetic until you remember how many pilgrims showed up not for insight, but for pleasure. Aphrodite didn't mind. If you came looking for love, she took your coin either way. The Greeks had a word for this kind of ritual. Hieros gamos, the sacred marriage. It was practiced not just by Aphrodite's cults, but across Near Eastern traditions. A king might symbolically marry a priestess in the goddess's name, sealing harvests and dynasties in the bedsheets. Historians still argue whether these rites involved actual sex, or if it was all theatrical metaphor, but the effect was the same. Power, passed through bodies, divinity, transferred in moans and murmurs. Aphrodite's temples weren't about sin. They were about surrender. And here's your sex story of the Night Emperor Caligula. Rome's chaos goblin took the idea of sacred sex and ran straight off a cliff with it. He turned parts of his palace into a brothel, staffing it with senators' wives and daughters to humiliate the elite. He declared himself a living god, married his sister, and once threw an orgy to celebrate the changing of his toga. But beneath the madness was a twisted echo of Aphrodite's rites sex as ritual, as punishment, as spectacle. It wasn't love. It was control. And if Aphrodite watched from her Roman form, Venus, she might have laughed, or cringed, or leaned in to take notes. Back in the temple, you notice how the walls are carved with graffiti declarations of devotion, names of lovers, complaints about betrayals, ancient Yelp reviews of the heart. Anecto slept with Myron and forgot my name. I gave 3 coins, and she gave me 4 lies. Praise be to Aphrodite, who cursed my husband with desire for the neighbor's goat. Not all love stories end in poetry. Most end in scribbles. You move past the altar into the sanctum, where the air thickens with perfume and prayer. Someone is singing. Low, rhythmic, Not quite Greek, maybe Lydian, maybe older. Aphrodite predates the Greeks. Remember, she's older than Homer, older than marble, possibly even older than language. Some scholars trace her roots to the Near East Astarte, Ishtar, Inanna, fertility goddesses with hips like mountains and eyes that birthed empires. If Aphrodite was imported, she was never fully naturalized. She kept her foreign edge. That's why no one ever really trusted her. She wasn't just Greek. She was other. And that brings us to a curious debate. Was Aphrodite ever truly a goddess of love in the modern sense? Or was she something much older, much weirder, a fertility demon, a cosmic force of heat and growth and decay? Some of her earliest depictions don't show a dainty nude maiden, but a towering figure with wings and lions at her side. Not the kind of beauty you date, the kind you survive. Aphrodite might have mellowed in the hands of later sculptors, but her bones are wild. She's not here to comfort you. She's here to remake you, which leads to your quirky detail of the evening in some rural mountain villages in ancient Greece. Festivals of Aphrodite involved groups of women smearing themselves in mud and wine, chanting erotic poetry while dancing barefoot in vineyards. These weren't parties. They were rituals of release. Women purged grief, anger, lust, whatever had built up. Aphrodite's worship was a pressure valve for a culture that gave women few spaces to scream. And scream they did. Naked, loud, unashamed. If that sounds scandalous to us, it's only because we still carry the echo of later moral edits. Now back to your temple path, where the murals shift from tender embraces to graphic romps that would give a Roman bathhouse second thoughts. This was normal. This was divine. No shame, only story. Each scene a parable. This is what desire looks like. This is what power feels like. And above them all, Aphrodite, always watching, never flinching. But something creeps in around the edges, judgment. Not from the goddess, from history. Because by the time Christianity rises and the old temples fall, Aphrodite goes from worshipped to whispered about. Her rituals are outlawed, her priestesses renamed harlots, her statues hidden or mutilated. She becomes a punchline, a warning. The Greeks who once adored her begin rebranding her. Philosophers like Plato split her in two: Aphrodite Pandemos, goddess of common lust, and Aphrodite Urania, goddess of noble, spiritual love. One is base, the other is pure. You can guess which one gets statues in the town square, and which one gets buried under euphemisms. Historians still argue whether this duality helped preserve her or just diluted her. Was it respect or erasure? A way to hold on to her while pretending she'd changed. Either way, the damage was done. The goddess who once owned temples larger than city halls was reduced to poetry and scandal. But even then, she didn't disappear. She just went underground. And you feel her now, behind your shoulder, in the flicker of a candle, in the warmth of skin too close to ignore. You realize Aphrodite never left. She just changed form. She slipped into art, into fragrance ads, into pop songs and Instagram captions. She's in your heartbeat when you swipe right, in your stomach when you're ghosted, in your chest when you fall too fast and lie to yourself about control. She is not just ancient. She is inevitable. You step out of the temple, the sun blinding and the world louder than before. You don't pray. You don't bow. But you glance over your shoulder, just once, and the air smells faintly of roses and ozone. You're knee-deep in the waves now, standing on the rocky coast where desire and disaster tend to wash up together. You've left the temples behind, but not the tension. Because as you move along the shoreline, something monstrous stirs beneath. Not a beast, exactly, but a consequence. Aphrodite doesn't just stir love, she leaves casualties. And sometimes those casualties have gills. Take Scylla, for instance. Once, she was beautiful, not stunning like Helen, not sculpted like Adonis, but lovely in a way that mattered. Gentle, mortal. She had long limbs, a shy laugh, and a swimmer's grace. She lived near the sea cliffs and never asked to be part of a myth. But then came Glaucus, a sea god with algae in his beard and poor taste in confessions. He fell for Scylla. Hard. She didn't return the feeling. She avoided his stares, said no without drama. And that should have been the end. But rejection, in Greek mythology, is just the cue for divine interference. Enter Circe, the sorceress who liked transforming men into pigs and had a questionable dating history of her own. She wanted Glaucus too, and when she saw him pine for Scylla, something snapped. She brewed a potion, not a love potion, but something meaner. She poured it into Scylla's bathing pool. The next time the girl stepped in, her body changed. Tentacles sprouted from her waist. Dog heads snarled from her thighs. She screamed and became a monster. You don't need a PhD to see the metaphor. A girl says no. A god doesn't listen. A jealous rival punishes her body. Aphrodite doesn't appear in this story directly, but her influence drips from every vine. The original love triangle. The way desire leads not to kisses, but curses. The way a mortal woman's autonomy gets twisted into mythic horror. Now, here's your scholarly debate of the night. Some historians argue Scylla's transformation was less about punishment and more about protection. That maybe Circe was defending Glaucus by making his obsession impossible, or that Scylla was a sea nymph whose monstrous form was always symbolic, a warning to sailors, not a victim. Others insist this is textbook divine pettiness, an origin story written by men who didn't want women saying no. Either way, Scylla becomes a landmark. Not just geographically, she's literally part of the narrow strait between Italy and Sicily, but emotionally. A reminder that in these myths, has collateral damage. And now, your sex story of the evening. From Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra. Not the chapter people think they know the diagrams and flexible anatomy charts, but the sections on seduction, gossip, and the politics of pleasure. One passage describes how courtesans trained themselves not just in physical arts, but in conversation, facial expression, perfume mixing, and emotional manipulation. They didn't serve the body, they mastered the mind. The Kama Sutra sees seduction not as conquest, but as choreography. And while it never names Aphrodite, you can feel her ghost between the pages, the belief that love is not instinct, but skill. That attraction, like war, requires tactics. Back on your shoreline stroll, you spot another love casualty peeking from the cliffs. Scylla's story might be the most dramatic, but she's not alone. Everywhere you look in Greek myth, mortals who get too close to love gods end up twisted. Take Hera, for example. A mortal woman. Aphrodite cursed for refusing worship, or maybe just for existing. In some versions, Aphrodite cursed her with lust for her own father. In others, it's a divine revenge story. Aphrodite was insulted by Hera's mother, who boasted her daughter was more beautiful than the goddess. Aphrodite doesn't do second place, so she strikes back the only way she knows, through unwanted desire. Hera is driven to seduce her father, disguises herself, and conceives a child. When the truth comes out, she's hunted, ashamed, and transformed into a myrrh tree. That tree weeps sap, and from its bark, the child Adonis is born. Yes, that Adonis, the beautiful boy who becomes Aphrodite's favorite lover. So to recap, she curses a woman with incestuous desire, lets her be transformed into a tree, and then adopts the resulting child as her boyfriend. It's not just soap opera, it's myth at its most unhinged. And yet, no one calls Aphrodite evil. Why? Because she isn't. Not exactly. She doesn't act out of cruelty, but out of a cosmic indifference to consequences. Love wants what it wants. She just removes the filter. Here's a fringe tidbit to round out the section in a few Hellenistic texts. Aphrodite is credited with inventing cosmetics, not in a metaphorical goddess of beauty way, but literally. Recipes for eyeshadow, cheek stain, even exfoliants are linked to her. One scroll describes a balm made from crushed seashells and wine lees that blushes the cheeks with the kiss of cypress. Historians aren't sure if this was devotional branding or just early skincare influencers doing their thing. But it fits. Aphrodite doesn't just control desire, she manufactures it. Down to the cheekbone. You're wading deeper now, the waves climbing past your knees, and you feel how much of Aphrodite's world is submerged. The obvious stories, the weddings, the betrayals, the divine flings, those are above water. But the real legacy is what lurks beneath, the lives warped by unasked-for longing, the bodies reshaped by jealousy, the towns who renamed her temples when the consequences got too messy. You remember that Scylla wasn't the only monster in the straits. There was also Charybdis, a whirlpool, who swallowed ships whole. In some versions, she was another cursed woman. In others, just a natural hazard made mythical. But together, Scylla and Charybdis form a perfect metaphor stuck between a rock and a hard place, between lust and loathing, between what you want and what wanting costs. Aphrodite didn't invent that dilemma. She just taught us how to live in it. And so you float in that tension. Salt water in your mouth, seabirds crying above like they know how this ends. You look back at the shore. It's further than you remember. But forward. The sea stretches endlessly, warm and glittering, and even now, you feel her somewhere in the current, pulling you forward. Because desire doesn't retreat, it drags you onward. You're no longer in Greece. You feel the marble fade beneath your feet, replaced by white Roman stone, wider roads, and the thrum of something bigger, imperial. The air is thicker, more perfumed, and the temples are taller, their columns crowned not in quiet reverence, but in theatrical excess. Aphrodite has been rebranded, no longer just the sea-born seductress of scattered city-states. She's now Venus, mother of Rome, stamped on coins and declared ancestor to emperors. Her smile still faintly smug, but now it's state-sanctioned. And this isn't a downgrade. It's an upgrade with better PR. You're in the Forum now, walking past statues of her draped in flowing robes, her hair carefully curled into state-approved waves. But she's everywhere on banners, rings, armor. No longer just the goddess of bedroom whispers. She's now the patroness of civic virtue, military conquest, and dynastic propaganda. Because Rome doesn't mess around. It doesn't tolerate messy goddesses unless they're useful. And Venus is more than useful. She becomes the biological justification for empire. Julius Caesar claims her as his ancestor through Aeneas, the Trojan survivor you remember from earlier son of Aphrodite, reluctant founder of destiny. It's a brilliant move. If you can't justify your conquests through logic or law, do it through bloodline. Venus, now enshrined in marble and ritual, becomes the grandmother of Roman might. Love, elevated to a justification for global domination. But don't let the togas fool you. Venus is still Aphrodite underneath. The makeup is heavier, the title's longer, but she still plays the same game. Behind every marriage alliance arranged to keep power in the family, she's there. Behind every naval victory toasted with seductive poetry, she's there. Rome builds temples to her not just for worship, but to remind everyone who's in charge of hearts and heirs. Love isn't spontaneous anymore. It's policy. Here's your sex story of the night, this one slightly more scandalous. Emperor Augustus, the man who completed Caesar's divine mythos and wrapped the Republic in the imperial toga, knew the power of Venus. He associated her with his family line, and to show his piety, he clamped down on public morals. He passed laws encouraging childbirth, punished adultery, and even exiled his own daughter, Julia, for being too openly passionate. But behind closed doors, Augustus was no prude. He was known to keep files on the sexual habits of senators and occasionally entertained himself with elite courtesans. Love was not just a private act, it was intelligence gathering. Venus, in her Roman form, didn't just watch over marriage beds, she watched over secrets. Pillow talk was now political data. Meanwhile, the temples of Venus evolved into places where politics and passion blurred completely. In some cities, especially Paphos and Baiae, sacred prostitution was still practiced, though now dressed in layers of imperial ritual. Women, sometimes even men, served in her temples, not just as caretakers of the altar, but as intermediaries of divine pleasure. Sleep with them. And it wasn't sin, it was a civic experience. The lines of worship, consent, and power were never clear. But they were consistent. Venus always got her due. And here's your quirky detail. Rome had an entire calendar month dedicated to Venus. April, not just for flowers, but for fertility rites. In the festival of Veneralia, women would wash the statue of Venus in myrtle water and pray for love, beauty, and favor. They offered incense, laurel, and sometimes mirrors. Yes, mirrors. Because Venus wanted you to look, not just at her, but at yourself. Love, she taught, was self-awareness as much as surrender. Beauty wasn't passive, it was weaponized. Back in the streets of Rome, you see how far her influence spreads. Gladiators scratch her name into the walls before combat. Lovers etch hearts beneath her symbols. Even generals consult her oracles before launching campaigns. Venus becomes so entrenched that her image even makes it onto military standards. Think about that, troops marching under the banner of a love goddess. But that's the paradox. Rome embraces soft power in hard armor. Desire that conquers without resistance. But Venus doesn't just stick to statues and ceremonies. She slips into literature, too. Poets like Ovid and Catullus turn her into their muse, their excuse, their eternal other woman. Ovid, in his Ars Amatoria, writes seduction manuals disguised as poetry, giving readers detailed instructions on how to spot lovers at the racetrack, how to steal kisses discreetly, and how to fake tears during breakups. Venus isn't just in the text. She's in the subtext. Every trick, every metaphor, every breathy line about love is a prayer to her. And she rewards those who write her well. Historians still argue whether this Roman Venus was the same as the Greek Aphrodite. Some say she was sanitized, made noble. Others argue she simply adapted, changed her name, put on state robes, and kept playing her long game. But if you follow the pattern, the answer becomes clear. She's the same, because her method never changes. She gives you what you crave, then makes you suffer for wanting it. That's not malice. That's just balance. Now follow her further, past the palaces and forums, down into the villas of the elite. You walk through painted halls where frescoes depict Venus riding dolphins, emerging from clamshells, teasing Mars with half-laced sandals. In Pompeii, she's everywhere, sculpted into garden fountains, painted above beds, scratched into doorways. And when Vesuvius erupts, burying the city in ash, her symbols are preserved perfectly. Two lovers frozen mid-embrace, a mural of Venus untouched by flame. It's poetic, fitting. Even as the world collapses, her face survives. Because love, even when it kills you, always leaves something behind. You step through the ruins now, your feet quiet on the dusty mosaics, and you feel her watching. Not like a stalker, like a curator. She knows what you've seen. She knows what you think. And she knows that even with all this evidence, all this carnage masked in roses, you still want to believe in her. You still want to fall. And maybe that's the secret. She doesn't trick you. You trick yourself. You're walking now through pillars taller than your pride, down a street paved with long eroded prayers, into one of Aphrodite's oldest temples, not the glossy Roman ones with gold domes and senators trying to look pious for tax breaks, but the originals, earthy, lush, visceral. This is Paphos, Cyprus, and it doesn't smell like divinity. It smells like sweat and saffron and something older than monotheism. You're here not as a pilgrim, exactly, but as a witness. Because tonight, you're stepping into one of the strangest, most misunderstood chapters of Aphrodite's legacy sacred sex, temple prostitution, and the erotic liturgies no one teaches in school. The locals call her Aphrodite Urania here, the celestial form. But she's not floating on a cloud. She's embedded in everything: the curves of the fruit on the altar, the softness of the goat skins beneath your sandals, the way the priestesses hold eye contact too long. Worship here isn't quiet. It doesn't involve sitting still and reciting lines in your head. It's participatory, intimate, and more than a little sweaty. You move past the first chamber where pilgrims light oil lamps and leave garlands, then past another where women paint their faces with crushed berries and clay. Then into the inner sanctum, an open courtyard under the stars, where the line between performance and prayer dissolves completely. Women may be priestesses, maybe oracles, maybe neither move among the crowd, touching forearms, whispering names, offering themselves not as individuals, but as embodiments. You're not sleeping with them. You're sleeping with her, or at least that's how it's framed. And yes, this is where things get complicated. Historians still argue whether these acts were literal or symbolic. Were these women prostitutes? Were they volunteers? Were they coerced? Ancient sources contradict each other. Herodotus claimed every woman in Babylon had to serve once in the temple of Ishtar, a likely ancestor of Aphrodite, by lying with a stranger. Other texts suggest it was far more selective, deeply ceremonial, and often limited to high-status priestesses. Either way, the point remains: sex in these temples wasn't considered sin. It was sacrament. Now for your sex story of the night, this one, from the deeply sensual, but slightly less reliable pages of The Erotic Spirit. Through history, there's a legend of a Phoenician queen, Dido's great-grandmother maybe, who used temple sex as a form of diplomacy. Visiting rulers were invited not to feasts, but to ritual bedchambers, where negotiations happened with wine in one hand and divinity in the other. Deals were struck not with ink, but with size. Love as leverage, orgasm as contract, Aphrodite's style exactly. And here's your quirky footnote. Some ancient coins from Corinth depicted Aphrodite on one side and a reclining woman, possibly a temple priestess on the other. These coins weren't just currency. They were rumored to be tokens exchanged in the temples themselves, part of a system where donation, devotion, and desire formed an economic loop. Worshippers paid for beauty, left satisfied, and believed themselves spiritually enriched. You've heard of faith healing. This was faith. Feeling. Back in the temple, the rituals continue. A young man kneels at the altar, eyes closed, arms open. A woman stands behind him, braiding his hair and chanting something in a dialect you don't recognize. There's wine, honey, oil on skin. The air pulses. You realize this isn't just religion, it's transformation. Aphrodite's followers didn't separate body and soul. They didn't pray with words alone. They prayed with touch, with rhythm, with release. And here's where it gets even more interesting. This wasn't just about pleasure. It was about power. In a society where most women had little say in public life, these temples were loopholes. Female priests held authority here. They could initiate rituals, deny worshippers, interpret omens. Outside the sanctuary, they were daughters, wives, concubines. Inside, they were avatars of a goddess who answered to no one. Of course, it wasn't all liberation. Not every temple was a feminist utopia. Some were manipulated by wealthy patrons, others by corrupt officials. Over time, as empires changed hands and moral codes stiffened, Aphrodite's rites were gradually scrubbed clean. The sex was deemed indecent, the rituals rebranded. By the early Christian era, temples were dismantled or converted, and Aphrodite's sacred orgies became cautionary tales. Temple priestesses were rewritten as prostitutes. Passion became perversion, and all that messy, complicated worship was buried under centuries of prudish dust. But you're here now, centuries too late, standing in the rubble of what used to be holy. A few columns remain. The altar is broken. But if you listen, really listen, you can almost hear it. The rustle of silk, the quiet chant, the breath caught in a stranger's throat. You remember that Aphrodite's power was never limited to pleasure. It was about disarming you, about making you forget yourself just long enough to see yourself. Love, in her temples, wasn't comfort. It was confrontation, and now you understand why her worship couldn't last. Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. It blurred too many lines, asked too many uncomfortable questions. When does desire empower? When does it enslave? Can worship include lust without losing reverence? The new religions wanted answers. Aphrodite only offered mirrors. You leave the temple under a waxing moon, salt clinging to your ankles, your mind soft and humming. You realize you didn't pray, not aloud, but she heard you anyway, because in her eyes, every longing is a liturgy. You're sitting now in a shaded portico somewhere in ancient Athens, the stone beneath you warm, the air heavy with olive smoke and intellectual superiority. This is the quiet part of the city, not the temple courtyards, or the marketplace, or the brothels, humming with merchants and heat, but the academy. The brain hive, the gossip mill of men who think too hard and feel too little. And right now, they're talking about Aphrodite, not worshiping, not praying, just analyzing, dissecting her with metaphors and moral frameworks like they're trying to trap the wind in a scroll. The philosophers are gathering, robes properly wrinkled, scrolls tucked under arms, eyes sharp. They're about to do what no soldier or king ever could try to reduce the goddess of love to footnotes. Plato's here, smug as ever, ready to split Aphrodite in two. In his symposium, he offers up one of the most influential intellectual edits of the divine ever attempted. According to him, there are two Aphrodites. One is Aphrodite Pandemos, common Aphrodite, the goddess of physical love, drunken kisses, and public affection. She's messy, fleshly, impulsive. Then there's Aphrodite Urania, heavenly Aphrodite, the goddess of the soul, of intellectual connection, of the kind of love that makes you write poems instead of babies. Guess which one Plato prefers? He declares that true love is the love that elevates, that physical desire is just the on-ramp to the real freeway, which is the pursuit of wisdom and the divine, wanting someone's body. Cute, wanting their mind. Now that's the good stuff. Aphrodite Pandemos becomes the girl you party with. Aphrodite Urania becomes the one you marry, or at least co-author a philosophical treatise with. But here's where it gets awkward. Plato might pretend he's distancing himself from the mess of mortal attraction, but he's still obsessed with it. The whole dialogue is a bunch of men talking about how desire shapes the world. Socrates, supposedly the most rational man in Athens, tells a story about being taught by a priestess of love named Diotima, who explained that all love starts with beauty and climbs upward through bodies, then minds, then ideas, until you arrive at pure form. Sounds spiritual, almost mathematical. But Aphrodite would roll her eyes, because she knows none of these men ever had to bleed for love, or be judged for it, or die in childbirth for it. They get to intellectualize it while someone else does the feeling. Now for your sex story, and tonight we pivot to the polished world of Renaissance Italy, where the Medici family, those Medicis helped resurrect classical ideals and brought Aphrodite back into art under her Roman name, Venus. Sandro Botticelli painted her famously in The Birth of Venus, emerging from the sea on a shell, all blonde curls and soft gaze. What most people miss is that the model for Venus was Simonetta Vespucci, a noblewoman rumored to have been the lover of both Giuliano de' Medici and Botticelli himself. Her image was everywhere painted, sculpted, whispered about. She became the new standard of beauty, blending divine grace and mortal longing. When Botticelli died, he requested to be buried at her feet, literally, in the same church. That's Aphrodite's power to make men build cathedrals out of crushes. Meanwhile, back in Athens, the philosophers keep talking. Aristotle takes a stab at it. He admits love is necessary. People need bonds to form communities, but he tries to steer it toward utility. Friendship based on virtue. Marriage is for politics. Sex, fine, but only if it doesn't interfere with order. For Aristotle, Aphrodite is less a goddess and more a side effect. Something you manage, not something you praise. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe that Plato's split Aphrodite model was part of a broader PR campaign. You see, by the time he was writing, Athens was trying to recover from wars, moral panics, and public orgies that got a little too public. Reducing Aphrodite to types allowed intellectuals to distance themselves from the messiness of passion while still borrowing her brand. Historians still argue whether Plato respected Aphrodite or feared her. But the fact remains, the more he wrote about her, the less real she became. What's strange is how well that strategy worked. Even today, we divide love into categories: pure and impure, high and low, spiritual and physical. And every time we do, we echo Plato's original nervousness. We still carry the fear that loving with our bodies makes us lesser. That passion must be contained. That desire, if not properly managed, will embarrass us. But Aphrodite, she never split herself. She never apologized. She was whole from the beginning. Naked, yes, but never divided. You sit now among the marble columns, watching as students debate forms and ethics and ideal loves. They quote Socrates, cite epics, gesture toward the heavens, but none of them notice the breeze that passes between them. None of them feel the heat beneath the stone. None of them see the olive tree branch twitch slightly, not from wind, but from someone watching. She's still here. You realize, not impressed, but amused. You're in a forest now, not the kind that whispers lullabies, but one that watches you back. The trees are tall, unyielding, and their shadows stretch like rules you don't want to break. This is Artemis territory, the goddess of the hunt, of wild animals, of untouched things. Her forests are sacred, her followers untouched by men. Their chastity not just a choice, but a banner. And tonight, you're not alone in the woods. Aphrodite's here too. And she didn't bring a picnic, because when the goddess of love and the goddess of virginity meet, it's not a debate. It's a standoff. You can feel the tension before either of them appears. One brings roses and honey, the other wolf howls and silver arrows. One wants surrender, the other control. And yet, both are powerful, both divine, and both absolutely, eternally incompatible. That's what makes this mythic rivalry so magnetic. It's not just about chastity versus seduction. It's about autonomy, about who gets to decide how love, desire, and womanhood are defined. Take the story of Hippolytus. He's a prince, a worshipper of Artemis, and proudly repulsed by sex. Think smug celibate energy with a dash of condescension. He refuses to honor Aphrodite, scoffs at her rights, and goes around telling everyone how pure and superior he is for avoiding women. Aphrodite doesn't take that well. She doesn't send a plague. She doesn't drop a lightning bolt. She goes for something much more devastating desire. She makes Phaedra, Hippolytus' stepmother, fall in love with him. And not just in love. Obsessively, painfully, poisonously. Phaedra resists, tries to pray it away, but Aphrodite's spell holds tight. Eventually, she confesses. He recoils, naturally. She panics, and in the chaos, she accuses him of assault before taking her own life. Hippolytus is exiled, then killed, run over by his own chariot when his horses are spooked by a sea monster. No trial, no mercy, just collateral damage. Historians still argue over the moral of this myth. Is it a cautionary tale about rejecting passion, about the dangers of repressed desire, about stepmoms? Everyone has a theory, but what's clear is this. Aphrodite doesn't like being ignored. She doesn't demand worship through devotion alone. She demands you live in her world, feel her influence, acknowledge her primacy. Hippolytus tried to carve out a life where love didn't matter, and for that, he was erased. Now for your sex story tonight, a different kind of silence. In ancient Japan, the Heian court was famous for its elegant, coded romances. Women of the court, often hidden behind screens or layers of silk, would exchange poetry with their suitors, sometimes for months, before ever meeting face to face. These erotic letters were indirect, suggestive, and deeply strategic. A single misplaced syllable could mean disgrace. And yet, through this restraint, entire affairs unfolded. Love was not loud. It was whispered. A tension not unlike the one between Artemis and Aphrodite. One celebrates directness. The other insists on mystery. But both know power. And both shape behavior. Back in the mythic forest, Artemis hears what Aphrodite has done and is furious. Not just for Hippolytus, but for the insult. Because Aphrodite didn't just kill someone, she invaded Artemis's world, desecrated her purity, used desire as a weapon in a domain where desire was not supposed to exist. Their rivalry escalates in other stories. 2 in 1. Aphrodite curses a young girl named Callisto, a devotee of Artemis, to be seduced by Zeus in disguise. When Callisto becomes pregnant, Artemis expels her. Then Aphrodite ensures she's transformed into a bear. Then hunted. Then, eventually, tossed into the stars. It's not petty. It's archetypal. Artemis guards solitude. Aphrodite breaks it. Artemis demands distance. Aphrodite demands closeness. And every time they collide, something or someone gets caught in the middle. Here's a quirky detail to tuck in your satchel in certain cult practices. Followers of Aphrodite would mock the customs of Artemis during festivals. They'd dress as wild virgins, only to strip mid-ceremony, chanting songs about seduction, fertility, and defiance. It was satire, but also a theological clapback. Even back then, religious pageantry had a flair for theatrical shade. Scholars debate whether these rituals were meant to dishonor Artemis or simply to reclaim space for sensuality in a world obsessed with abstinence. And then there's the question of gender. Artemis's version of womanhood is sharp, boundary-driven, armored in distance. Aphrodite's is fluid, yielding, and overpowering. But both hold a mirror to their cultures. The Greeks weren't confused about femininity. They just knew it came in extremes. Be too chaste, and you risk Aphrodite's wrath. Be too sensual, and you risk Artemis's judgment. No one, it seems, escapes. But that's the deeper truth. The real rivalry isn't between the goddesses. It's inside you. Between the part that wants to run barefoot through the woods, untouched, untethered, and the part that wants to be seen, desired, devoured. Between restraint and release. Between no and yes. Aphrodite and Artemis aren't enemies. They're twin instincts pulling your spine in opposite directions. You reach the edge of the forest now, where the moonlight softens and the air smells like thyme and salt. You look back and see no one, but you feel them. Both of them. Watching, waiting, neither pleased, neither forgiving. And the truth is, you'll never choose. You'll sway. You'll oscillate. Because to live in this world is to walk the line between them. To ache and to retreat. To desire and to deny. And that's what they want. You're somewhere between dream and ruin now, standing beside a sleeping figure who glows faintly in the moonlight, as if his skin remembers the touch of divinity. This is Adonis. He doesn't know you're watching. He's dreaming, probably of hunting, or running, or some vague mortal ambition that will not matter by sunrise, because Adonis is doomed. Always has been. And the woman who loves him, Aphrodite, truly, passionately, inconveniently knows that. She just doesn't care. Or maybe she does, but not enough to change anything, because Adonis isn't her first mortal lover, and he won't be her last. But he's the one she can't seem to let go. You follow her as she visits him, again and again, like a goddess who forgot she's not supposed to feel this much. She watches him sleep. She brings him fruit. She warns him not to go hunting today, and tomorrow, and the next. But he always goes. And every version of this story ends the same way, with a wild boar, a fatal wound, and a goddess screaming into the soil. Some say the boar was sent by Artemis, angry over their rivalry. Others say it was Ares, jealous and furious. Others suggest it was just fate doing what fate does, reminding everyone that mortals break. When Adonis dies, Aphrodite doesn't rage, not like before. She cradles him, cries. Her tears mix with his blood, and from that, the anemone flower blooms, red, fragile, too easily torn by wind. It's not justice, it's myth, grief with petals. But this isn't the only story of love undone by mortality. There's Anchises, yes. You remember him. The shepherd she seduced under orders from Zeus, mother of Aeneas, founder of Rome. She warned him never to brag about their night together. He did. Lightning found him. Or maybe paralysis. Either way, he was broken. She never visited again, and yet she keeps returning to mortals. Not because it ends well, but because it starts so beautifully. There's something in the fragility, the temporariness, that draws her back. Immortals don't understand change. They don't age. They don't fade. But mortals burn. And Aphrodite, eternal as she is drawn to that burn like a moth in diamonds. Now, your sex story of the night, and it's a messy one. In 18th century Russia, Empress Elizabeth Petrovna was said to keep a lover's list that spanned dozens of names. She handpicked officers from her imperial guard, often plucking them mid-patrol, dressing them in silks, and parading them at masked balls. It was said she rarely took the same man twice, and when one lover disappointed her, he was reassigned sometimes to Siberia. The court gossip called it indulgence, but behind it was something very Aphrodite, a hunger for beauty, a refusal to apologize for desire, and an understanding that love and cruelty often share a bed. Now back to Adonis. In one version of the myth, Aphrodite begs Zeus to intervene after his death. He listens, a rare moment of softness from the Thunder King, and decrees that Adonis may return from the underworld for part of the year, half the year with her, half in the land of shadows. It's a compromise, a divine custody arrangement, and for a while, it works. She greets him with garlands, with laughter, with a kind of tenderness she rarely shows the world. But when he's gone, she darkens. She wilts. This pattern, the loss, the return. The loss again becomes ritual. Cults spring up around it. Women mourn Adonis with dirges and flower baskets. The gardens of Adonis bloom quickly and die quicker, sprouting fast from shallow soil, a metaphor that writes itself. They aren't just grieving him. They're grieving every loss they've ever been told to accept silently. Every man sent to war, every child stolen by plague, every time love showed up and couldn't stay. And here's your quirky detail in certain mystery cults. Adonis wasn't just mourned. He was symbolically resurrected through seasonal rites. Women would chant, carry his image, then bury it in the earth, only to dig it up weeks later in celebration. The practice blurred the lines between agriculture, divinity, and memory. Historians still debate whether this was a true resurrection rite or just symbolic comfort. But it doesn't really matter. The grief was real, and so was the relief, even if temporary. Aphrodite's other lovers didn't fare much better. There's Phaon, a ferryman from Lesbos, who was given a magical ointment by Aphrodite that made him beautiful. Too beautiful. He became so desirable that Sappho herself is said to have loved him and thrown herself into the sea when he didn't return the feeling. Did Aphrodite intend this? Maybe. Maybe not. But that's the thing with divine gifts, they rarely come without consequence. Beauty, like love, is not a blessing. It's a weapon you don't always know you're carrying. You start to realize that Aphrodite's love is rarely kind. It elevates. Yes, it transforms, but it also consumes. It doesn't make you safe. It makes you significant. And in the myths, that's rarely a good thing. Mortals who love her or are loved by her become stories, not survivors. But they're remembered, and that, in her eyes, might be worth the cost. And now you're walking away from Adonis's grove, where the anemones sway in silent testimony. The path is soft beneath your feet, the moon high, the breeze thick with old perfume, and the kind of stillness that feels earned. You think about every person who's ever fallen too hard, too fast. Every time you've tried to hold on to someone who was never meant to stay. Every time the goodbye felt worse than the goodbye's silence. That's her world. That's her gospel. Not happily ever after. Just we loved, and it changed us. You're walking through a palace corridor now, long and quiet, echoing with the click of sandals and the softer, subtler sounds of regrets that still haven't faded. The torches flicker on polished walls, casting warped reflections that don't quite match your own. This is the space where Aphrodite works best. Not the battlefield, not the altar, but this, the silence after attraction has done its work. The rooms where choices get replayed, the moments when pride, wrapped in a silk robe, realizes it's been outplayed by lust. Because if there's one thing Aphrodite loves more than love itself, it's taking down the self-important, especially when they think they're above desire. You already know she doesn't pick fights with nobodies. She aims higher queens, kings, the overly virtuous, the self-righteous. Anyone who dares walk around thinking they're untouchable gets her full attention. Not with swords or storms, with temptation, with beauty, with someone who looks at them too long and smiles just right. She doesn't need lightning bolts. She uses eye contact, and it works, over and over, and she doesn't even pretend it's an accident. Take the story of Bellerophon, the guy who slays the Chimera, tames Pegasus, basically becomes a hero-adjacent icon. But then he starts believing he's above the gods, maybe even worthy of dining among them. And what does Aphrodite do? She doesn't confront him directly. She doesn't need to. She sends a series of dreams, subtle impulses, a woman he can't stop thinking about. The myths never say she explicitly cursed him, but something derails him. He flies too high, tries to reach Olympus. Zeus swats him down like a fly with hubris. He ends up wandering, blinded, forgotten. All because somewhere along the way, he mistook immunity for immunity to attraction. Now, your sex story tonight isn't mythical, but it's absolutely Aphrodite core. Let's talk about the court of Charles II of England, where the king's official mistress, Barbara Palmer, wielded power through seduction with such strategic precision that diplomats reportedly had to win her favor before meeting the king. She was called the uncrowned queen, and with good reason. She had apartments in the palace, 5 children by Charles, and influence in nearly every corner of English politics. Women hated her. Men feared her. The church loathed her. And yet, she endured. Because Charles, for all his supposed control, could not resist her. And she knew it. Aphrodite didn't create Barbara Palmer, but she'd have proudly called her kin. Back to the myths, one of Aphrodite's favorite pastimes is tripping up the arrogant, especially when they pretend not to care about beauty. One infamous target was Narcissus, beautiful beyond reason, cold as marble. He rejected every lover, scoffed at emotion, and lived as though he'd invented solitude. Aphrodite didn't take that kindly, so she let him fall in love with his own reflection. He saw himself in a pool of water, leaned closer, and never looked away again. Some say he wasted away. Others say he drowned. But either way, he died admiring his own perfection. And in his place, a flower grew. The narcissus, delicate, hollow, always facing down. Was it vengeance, a lesson, a joke? Maybe all three. Aphrodite didn't need to touch him. She just exposed him to himself. That's the thing about her magic, it isn't invasive. It reveals. If you're hollow, it shows. If you're insecure, it amplifies. If you're proud, it topples. Here's your quirky detail in some lesser-known cults. Aphrodite was invoked not just for love spells, but for unlove spells. That's right, rituals meant to cool desire, to end affairs, to make someone forget a lover. These rituals included bitter herbs, animal bile, and clay figurines buried upside down. Historians still debate whether these spells were meant to punish or heal. But the fact that people begged Aphrodite to undo her influence is telling. She wasn't just a gift giver. She was a problem people tried to manage. And sometimes, she punished people not for loving, but for thinking they couldn't be touched by love. Like Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, who led armies with unshakable focus and refused all suitors. Until one war, one clash with Achilles, and suddenly, she's looking into his eyes, wounded, dazed, heart racing in her final breath. Some stories say she died hating him, others say she loved him in that last second. Achilles weeps as he removes her helmet, as if shocked to find a woman beneath the warrior. But Aphrodite's hand is over that moment. Love, not victory, is what undoes both of them. It's poetic, of course, but also cruel, because Aphrodite's lessons don't come gently. She doesn't do teaching moments. She does consequences. You ignore her long enough, you get humbled. And the irony. The more you fight her, the stronger her grip becomes. That's what makes her terrifying. You can't kill her. You can't bribe her. You can only surrender, but surrender looks different for everyone. For some, it's a love letter they never send. For others, it's a kiss they wish they hadn't returned. Or the realization, years later, that one choice made in passion rerouted their entire life. Aphrodite doesn't need you to fall into bed. She just needs you to admit you're not immune. Once you do that, the spell is already working. And if you still think you're the exception, consider this. Even gods fell for her. Hermes, Ares, Dionysus, Hephaestus, all of them enchanted, all of them changed. Even Athena, distant and armored, once paused during battle when Aphrodite's aura drifted across the field. Even Hera, queen of Olympus, borrowed Aphrodite's girdle to seduce Zeus, because even the goddess of marriage knew that if you want to win, you play Aphrodite's game. So you step now through the palace corridor into a room full of mirrors. You see yourself in every angle, not as you think you are, but as you are when someone sees you with love in their eyes. It's disarming, uncomfortable, beautiful. You want to look away, but Aphrodite won't let you. You're walking now through a dim hallway lined with cracked frescoes and faded myths, where Aphrodite isn't painted golden and radiant, but wild-eyed, disheveled, and strangely mortal. This isn't the goddess of clamshells and whispered prayers. This is the post-party Aphrodite, the aftermath Aphrodite. The one nobody likes to talk about when they're lighting votives and praying for a cute crush to text them back, because something happens to every deity. Eventually, they go from worshipped to whispered about, from feared to mocked, from divine to cautionary. And Aphrodite, more than any other Olympian, got dragged through that transformation kicking and giggling. You start to notice how often she's used not as a goddess to invoke, but a punchline. Roman satirists started it, painting her as overly dramatic, self-absorbed, even slutty. Later, Christian writers picked up the smear campaign, using Venus as a shorthand for all the sins of the flesh. And somewhere between the sermons and the slurs, she stopped being divine. She became that girl. You know the one: too much perfume, too many lovers, cries in the bath, ruins lives without meaning to. Aphrodite wasn't removed from mythology. She was downgraded. And that might be more dangerous than forgetting her entirely. You turn a corner, and now you're in a medieval chapel where the Virgin Mary stands quietly over an altar, all blue robes and pure eyes. And somewhere hidden in the Latin inscriptions, buried beneath the glass mosaics, you can feel Aphrodite watching. Not angry, just aware. The Virgin became everything she wasn't: modest, obedient, sexless. It's not a coincidence. One goddess had to be erased so another could ascend. Aphrodite, with her hips and her hunger, had no place in a world that was trying to civilize desire. So she was converted into a warning. Don't be like her, they said. Don't tempt, don't tease, don't want too much. But she didn't vanish. She just got quieter, rebranded. You can find her in Shakespeare, where love is chaos, and women who desire too much always die by Act 5. You can find her in Renaissance paintings, where she's reduced to reclining nude forms without a gentsi decoration, rather than deity. Even Botticelli's Birth of Venus, beautiful as it is, strips her of any real power. She's idealized, not respected. She's admired, not feared. That's the trick. They kept her image and removed her autonomy. Now for your sex story tonight, a modern echo of divine punishment. In 18th century France, courtesan Marie-Madeleine Guimard was so renowned for her beauty and wit that kings and cardinals fought over her. She hosted salons where philosophers, dancers, and nobles mingled over oysters and scandal. She built herself a theater, yes, her own theater, where she both performed and curated desire. But after the revolution, she was stripped of wealth and status, her name mocked in pamphlets. The same society that once worshipped her body turned on her the moment she lost control of the narrative. Just like Aphrodite. Praised, then punished. Idolized, then erased. And here's your quirky detail in some medieval bestiaries, those odd little encyclopedias of animals, real and imagined. There's a creature called the Venus bird. It's described as beautiful, melodic, irresistible to other birds, and cursed. Anyone who follows it loses their way. It never nests. It sings endlessly. Scholars still argue if it was meant to represent desire itself, or just the dangers of being led by attraction. Either way, It's Aphrodite, disguised with feathers. Back in the hallway of history, you notice how Aphrodite keeps surviving not in temples, but in tropes. She becomes the femme fatale, the siren, the woman who knows too much, sleeps with too many, asks too loudly. Every time a story punishes a woman for wanting, she's there. Every time a girl is blamed for what others project onto her body, she's there. She's not the villain. She's the mirror, and what's worse is how often that mirror gets cracked. Even now, even today, people still divide love into neat little binaries. Virgin or whore, wife or mistress, soulmate or side piece. Aphrodite laughs at that. She was all of them, at once, and we hated her for it. But there's a strange sort of power in being the cautionary tale. When you're no longer allowed to be divine, you get to be honest. Aphrodite, stripped of temples and robes, becomes raw, relatable. She stops pretending to be kind. She becomes the voice in your head that says, text them anyway. The gut feeling that says, go, even if it ends badly. The ache in your chest that isn't pain exactly, it's want. Want that never got a safe place to land. You walk now through a gallery of modern art, where Aphrodite has re-emerged, but only halfway. In perfume ads, in lingerie lines, in pop music. She's no longer worshipped, but she's profitable. Love is marketable. Beauty is content. But the goddess, she's hollowed out. Her name sold in lowercase. Her story reduced to hashtags. And maybe that's the final insult. Not that we stopped fearing her, but that we stopped taking her seriously. Historians still debate what she meant, who she was, where she came from. Was she Greek or imported? Was she divine or demonic? Was she liberation or corruption? But maybe the question isn't what she was. Maybe it's what we made her. You stop before a mirror, dusty and framed in gold. You see yourself, but also her, smiling slightly. Not angry, just amused. You've judged her, slandered her, quoted her badly, but you've also needed her. Every time your heart beat faster, every time your skin remembered a touch, every time you fell for someone who wasn't safe. That was her, still is. You're sitting now in the corner of a half-lit library, pages cracking under your fingertips, scrolls whispering ancient contradictions, and every scholarly voice tugging you in a different direction. Because here's the thing about Aphrodite, no one can agree on who or what she really was. She's the most recognizable face in the entire mythological canon, and yet her origins are still wrapped in fog. Maybe that's the point. Maybe she was never meant to be understood, just felt. The early Greeks weren't even sure what to call her. Some knew her as Aphrodite Urania, celestial and abstract, born of the sea and sky without ever touching a womb. Others swore she was Aphrodite Pandemos, the common goddess, daughter of Zeus and Dione, tangled in the politics of Olympus like a very attractive HR scandal. And some older, stranger voices whisper that she came from even further away from Phoenicia. Maybe, or Cyprus, or the dusty chaos of Mesopotamia, where she wasn't a goddess of romance but of sex. War, storms, and lions. Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte. You can draw a straight line from their temples to hers if you squint hard enough. Or if you stop pretending the Greeks invented everything. Historians still argue whether Aphrodite was a local invention or a cultural remix. Did she emerge organically from Greek soil? Or was she a divine import that got a Mediterranean glow-up? Was her mythology shaped by trade routes and shared rituals? Or was she simply too useful not to exist? Too powerful a symbol to resist, 'cause let's face it, a goddess who governs both arousal and agriculture, both diplomacy and jealousy, both war and wedding nights. That's a tool every culture wants in its divine toolkit. You leaf through another scroll, and the contradictions pile up. One source describes her as gentle, all doves and perfume. Another says she rode into battle armored like Athena and left cities in ruin. Some cults carved statues of her fully clothed, modest, even stern. Others worshipped her naked, with open arms and eyes that promised nothing and everything. Some said she could make a man fall in love with a shadow. Others claimed she wept at funerals, her tears causing flowers to bloom where blood once soaked. You begin to wonder, was she ever a singular being? Or was she always a composite? A divine collage made from the broken pieces of human longing? Love isn't clean. Why should its goddess be? Now here's your sex story, and it's a good one. In ancient Carthage, long before the Romans arrived to salt the earth and rewrite the ending, priestesses of the goddess Tanit, possibly an Aphrodite-adjacent figure, were known to oversee rituals that involved both fertility offerings and public declarations of erotic power. One such ritual involved young women dancing barefoot on temple roofs under the full moon, while men below offered gifts not for sex, but for permission to speak. These women were untouchable. The ritual wasn't about access, it was about acknowledgement. They were divine gatekeepers, and their silence meant more than a sermon. Aphrodite didn't just live in these acts. She lived in the idea that love, when honored properly, is power, not submission, not shame, but currency. And now, your quirky footnote. Some early Christian writers were so nervous about Aphrodite's staying power that they tried to co-opt her entirely. In certain Gnostic texts, there are mentions of Sophia, a divine feminine force associated with wisdom, but also with cosmic yearning. Some scholars argue that Sophia was Aphrodite's afterlife, her theological ghost transformed into something palatable for monotheists. Not a goddess, but a concept. It didn't really work. Aphrodite refused to fade quietly into metaphor. She was too vivid, too human, too annoyingly persistent. And here's the real twist. The more scholars tried to define her, the less sense she made. She's not a fertility goddess. Not quite. She doesn't preside over childbirth or household stability. She doesn't make crops grow. She makes people want things. She creates need, hunger, discomfort. And in doing so, she animates the world. No love, no empires, no desire, no art, no lust, no revolutions, no betrayals, no poetry scribbled into margins. Aphrodite doesn't make things easy. She makes them inevitable. That's the theory. Anyway, you read another passage, this one by a modern scholar who argues Aphrodite isn't a goddess at all, but a process, a verb in disguise. Not someone you pray to, but something you become. Every time you want what you shouldn't. Every time you tell the truth at the worst possible moment. Every time you ache and act anyway. That's Aphrodite. Not on a pedestal. Not in a temple. In you. Whether you like it or not. And maybe that's the most radical thing about her. She was never here to be worshipped. She was here to be mirrored. To remind you that love is not safe. That longing is not polite. That beauty does not ask for permission. So now you close the scrolls. Let the pages rest. And you realize that maybe you're not supposed to solve her. Maybe the goal isn't clarity. Maybe it's contact. Because when you reach for her, she doesn't answer. She leans in. You're standing now at the edge of everything at the border between myth and memory. Temple and touchscreen. Altar and apartment. The world has shifted beneath your feet. And yet, somehow, she's still here. Aphrodite. Not as a statue or a scroll or a prayer whispered into rose-scented air, but as a presence, a pulse, a glitch in the algorithm when you see someone and forget what you were doing. She's still watching, still laughing, still causing more wars than any general could plan for. You see her now, not in marble, but in mirrors, on screens, in every playlist that makes your ribs ache. She's woven into the mundane, the text you send, and regret. The outfit you almost didn't wear, the sudden memory of someone you shouldn't still want. You're scrolling through your day, and you don't even notice that she's guiding your thumb. Because Aphrodite didn't die, she adapted. She went digital. Swipe left, swipe right, every gesture a little liturgy. You think you're playing the game, but she wrote the rules. She's on your apps, in your ads, in your inbox. Not judging, just present, waiting for you to feel something. That's her entire strategy. She doesn't need you to fall in love. She just needs you to feel off balance, to feel it all. In a world obsessed with numbness, she is the great awakener. And yet, despite her new platforms, she's still carrying her old contradictions. The divine flirt who punishes, the sensual healer who ruins lives, the goddess of intimacy who rarely tells the truth. You can see her legacy in modern icons. Marilyn Monroe, whose smile launched brands and breakdowns. Beyoncé, weaponizing beauty into power and turning heartbreak into national anthems. Even reality TV's revolving door of lovers and fights. It's just her temple with better lighting. People still want to believe they're immune, that they can want without consequence. That desire can be managed like a tax bracket. But Aphrodite, ever patient, just keeps pushing. Love in her realm still costs something. Here's your final sex story. In the late 20th century, a Japanese artist named Yayoi Kusama began creating mirrored rooms, immersive spaces where people walk in and find themselves duplicated endlessly. She said they were about infinity, about love, about the pain of being seen and the impossibility of ever truly knowing another person. Critics dismissed her for decades. Too emotional, too sexual, too strange. But now, her exhibitions sell out worldwide. People stand in line for hours just to take a selfie in a room of reflections. That's Aphrodite's full circle moment. Not just beauty, but the craving to witness it, to be inside it, to document it, and maybe to escape the shame of wanting it in the first place. And your final quirky detail: in 2010, a team of archaeologists unearthed a small, inscribed stone in the ruins of a Roman bathhouse in Turkey. It read only 3 words, carved by someone who was probably bored, probably wet, and definitely in their feelings Venus was here. No date, no context, just a whisper scratched into limestone, a quiet truth in a loud world. She was there, and she still is. Historians still argue what to make of Aphrodite's endurance. Some say she represents a universal archetype of desire. Others think she lingers because we never really resolved what to do with her. She was never allowed to be just one thing, never only sacred, never just scandalous. She's what happens when the world refuses to separate love from pain, joy from destruction, intimacy from performance. Maybe she survives because we need her, or maybe because she's part of us now. So you stand at this final doorway, not ready to leave, but ready to rest. You've walked through ruins, through temples, through blood-stained love letters and divine custody battles. You've met gods who made mistakes, mortals who paid for them, and a goddess who never once apologized. Aphrodite doesn't want your worship. She wants your honesty. She doesn't demand vows. She demands vulnerability. The whole time, she's been asking the same quiet question. What are you willing to risk to feel alive? And now, as you breathe, as you settle into the dark, as your thoughts begin to soften, she doesn't vanish. She reclines. She fades like perfume on a stranger's collarbone. Still present, still potent, just less obvious. Because love doesn't need to be loud to last. And now, you're drifting. The temples are far behind. The gods have returned to their constellations, and the myths have curled up beside you like old paperbacks on a shelf you never finished. The air is soft now, not because the night has changed, but because you've walked beside a goddess who doesn't hold your hand, but still leads you. Who doesn't tell you what to want, only dares you to admit you already do. Your body settles deeper into the quiet, the weight of the stories finally becoming warmth. Your breath slows, not because you're tired though you are, but because everything that needed to be said has been. You've seen how love unravels cities, how longing makes monsters, how even the divine get tangled in their own threads. And somehow, knowing that makes it all a little less scary, a little more human. Let your shoulders fall now. Let the noise fade. The lessons are still with you, humming in your chest, soft and persistent. You don't need to remember every name, every face. You only need to remember the feeling. That quiet hum beneath the myths, the pulse of desire, and curiosity, and something just beyond reach. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the stories dissolve into dream. Let the gods rest. You've made it through the night, and she's still with you. End of script. Sweet dream.